So a while ago, my kids were given a bag of jelly beans. Who here likes jelly beans? Oh yes, all right. But here's the thing about the jelly beans. Only half the bag were the yummy, sweet jelly beans. The other half were there to trick you. So for example, should you get a green jelly bean, you either got apple, which is what you want, or you got Brussels sprouts. Now, I'm one of those weird people that do actually enjoy roast Brussels sprouts, but not when they're in a jelly bean. If you got a blue jelly bean, you either got blueberry, sweet and yummy, or you got toothpaste. Some of the other really bad flavors were spilt rotten milk and roast meat. Once again, you know me, I'm such a carnivore, but you should never have roast meat flavored jelly beans. So this box of jelly beans came with this dial that you spin, and the way we played it was we'd spin the dial, and let's say that it landed on green. Everyone in the family would get a green jelly bean. And then we'd go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and eat them together. And then we would see, well, who got the sweet jelly beans and who got the gross jelly beans. And here is a photo of some of our experiences of the not so sweet. Okay, there we go. And that's not staged. That is literally how we felt. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because as we're going through this series called Follow, everything we're learning about Jesus is that Jesus is good. That Jesus is the goodness of God brought into this world. Even those who didn't believe in Jesus loved experiencing his goodness. And so if we as followers of Jesus want to be part of that story, we also want to be people through whom God's goodness is made available and tangible in this world. We want to be like those sweet jelly beans. When the world interacts with us, and this often happens, whereby people do engage with Christians and they do say, there is something about God's goodness in and through you. And yet Mahatma Gandhi had this to say, I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. Because sometimes, just like you've got two green jelly beans, you can also get two people who are maybe outwardly going to the same church, singing the same songs, for all appearances seem like they're both the same kinds of Christians, and yet one, when the world tastes them, they get sweet apple flavor, and then for others, we get Brussels sprouts jelly beans. And so if we are truly to be on this journey of learning to follow Jesus, and the way we're articulating this is to learn to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus does. If Jesus is this location of God's goodness coming into the world, we as Christians ought to be the same. People ought to experience us as good, not ultimately because we're good, but because God is good. And one of the many words that the scriptures use to define how people experience us is the word fruit. Now, this reminds me of something that's got nothing to do with my sermon, but when Bianca and I were engaged, and we started heading towards our wedding date, I was heading towards my bachelor's party, and Bianca was having her kitchen tea, and my sister, who was running the kitchen tea, she met with me, and she ran me through a bunch of questions, because the whole idea is that I would answer those questions, and then at the kitchen tea, they would match Bianca's answers to my answers to see how well she knew me, or how well she could predict the kinds of answers I'd give to the questions. So the one question was, if you could describe Bianca as a fruit, how would you describe her? And in a moment of absolute genius, I answered with the fruit of pear. Now, in the moment, the last thing that I was thinking about was what we mean when we say something has gone pear-shaped. Or how no one wants to have their body described as pear-shaped. The truth was, during that week, I tasted just a genuinely tasty, juicy pear. And so that is what I was thinking, but I had a whole lot of ladies scratching their heads when they heard my answer. But the point is, God doesn't just want us to be nice, He wants us to be fruitful, and there's a difference. So how do we as believers learn how to be fruitful? Well, a passage that we've come to so many times this year and will continue to do so because it really is at the center of what it means to live the kind of life where we be like Jesus, we be with Jesus, we become like Jesus, and we do what He does. John 15, verses 1 to 8. And this is what Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burnt. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Now, if you had to answer this question, what is the heart of what this passage is about? You'd probably conclude rightly that it is about remaining in Jesus. And then if I had to follow up with this question, and what does Jesus want for us? I've made it very easy for you by highlighting the words fruit. It is all over that entire passage. By remaining in Him, Jesus wants us to be fruitful. In fact, He says to bear much fruit. I want to highlight this final verse where it's to the Father's glory that we bear much fruit. And now listen to this final part of that verse. Showing yourselves to be my disciples. It is by bearing much fruit that we show ourselves to be disciples of Jesus. Now remember, by going through this series called Follow, we're learning what it means, not just to be cultural Christians whereby we do the least possible that we need to do, kind of go to church once or twice a month, if that, maybe give some money every now and again and try and be a good person. And that's what it means to be a Christian. Well, when Jesus said the words, follow me, He had something completely different in mind. And one of the ways this is described is by learning to become a disciple of Jesus. And so the challenge for us this year is as we grow, becoming increasingly true disciples of Jesus, we want to see the benefit and the fruit of what that looks like in our lives. And I believe this is so important. Dallas Willard says, the greatest issue facing the world today with all its heartbreaking needs is whether those who are identified as Christians will actually become disciples, students, apprentices, practitioners of Jesus Christ, steadily learning from Him how to live the life of the kingdom of the heavens into every corner of human existence. Some of you may remember That while this word disciple is maybe not a very common English word, maybe a word that better helps us understand what Jesus means by that is a word used here by Dallas Willard, the word apprentice. And here's the idea: if you've ever entered an apprenticeship, the picture in my mind is Mr. Miyagi and the Karate Kid, Daniel-san, where the whole idea is so much more than just teaching you a few skills for a few hours every week, but rather the true idea, in this case, of a rabbi who is inviting disciples to learn from them. It's not just about imparting a skill or two. The true heart of the rabbi is to develop themselves and reproduce themselves in the lives of these people known as disciples. And the same is true of Jesus. His big picture idea is to reproduce himself in us. And discipleship is nothing less than that. Now, one of the words used to describe just the evidence of Jesus being formed in me is this word fruit. Gordon Fee is a New Testament theologian. He says the essential nature of the fruit is the reproduction of the life of Christ in the believer. And so if we go back to this idea that Jesus was experienced as good, because he is the king bringing the kingdom. He is the Son of God bringing the glorious presence and love and power of God into this world. And for that reason, people experience the Jesus as good. And so it stands to reason that if that Jesus is going to be reproduced in us, the fruit of that has to be nothing short of God's goodness being made tangible to the world around us. So here's my attempt at a definition of this kind of fruit. It is the natural expression, meaning it has to be expressed. It is the natural expression of God's life in and through your life. Now, I believe this is so important. And the more I think about it, the more I think that true fruit and the kind of path of discipleship that produces fruit in our lives is probably one of the biggest differences between those two jelly beans. Though they look the same, one tastes bitter and sour and one tastes good. In other words, you can have two Christians who look and behave in many ways the same way. But one is going to lead to death and religiosity, and the other one's going to lead to life. Two Christians doing exactly the same thing outwardly. So, for example, when it comes to reading the Bible, one is doing it because they have to. One is doing it because they're hoping God's upstairs and he notices. One's doing it because it's just part of my religious duty. One's doing it because, the things I really want to do are all the fun stuff that God calls sin, and he's got all these boring things for me to do, and that's why I'm reading my Bible. Then you got another believer right next door, also sitting down reading their Bible, but to them it is life. It is convicting, it is wisdom, it is nourishing. It fuels a relationship with Jesus, and it produces fruit. The same could be said for what we're doing this morning, which is going to church. For one, it's religious duty, it's lifeless, it's a chore. And for the other, it's just a joy to connect with other believers and worship God together and hear from his word and be part of a community. And the same could be said about prayer and all other aspects of life in discipleship. Two green jelly beans. One brings life and joy, and one leads to death and is fruitless. So God wants us to bear much fruits. And if the essence of fruit is God's life and God's goodness being expressed in my life and through my life, then the world also needs us to be bearing much fruits. So let's talk about how we can lean into this. And so I have 4 big thoughts for us this morning. And the first one is this: focus on roots and not fruit. Focus on roots where you're planted, not fruits. Let me illustrate by referring to maybe another dynamic of life that we hope to be fruitful in. Just imagine you're wanting the fruit of a healthy life, both physically, emotionally, relationally. Here's what you can't do. Okay, I want some fruit, so tomorrow morning, I'm going to wake up and be 5 kilograms lighter. I truly wish that could work that way. Tomorrow, I'm going to wake up and be fit. Tomorrow, I'm going to wake up and have healthy blood pressure. Tomorrow, I'm going to wake up with a clear mind. I'm going to process emotions well. Oh, well, that didn't work. Let me try harder the next day. Now, we know that that is bizarre. That's not how this works. Because if that's the fruit you want, you need to work on the roots. In this case, you need to make time for the kinds of habits and practices, aka roots. You need to make time for the kinds of habits and practices that are going to naturally produce the fruit that you want. And in this case, you need to eat well, have regular exercise, sleep well, invest in healthy relationships. And in the same way, if we want the fruit of the goodness of God expressed in my life and through my life, you know, if we wake up tomorrow morning and we just kind of white knuckle our way into just expressing some fruit, well, that's great, but it's not going to last very long. It's kind of like we've got this lemon tree that we're about to say adios to in our garden because we've had it for about 10 years. And it's still only about yay big. It's got a few leaves. And while it's lemon season at the moment, we've got a whole 0 lemons on the lemon tree. Now, us waking up in the morning and just trying to kind of white knuckle some of God's fruit in our lives, it's almost as if I bought some fake plastic lemons and stuck it on the tree. It may deceive us for a short period of time, but it's not going to last. And so what that tree needs is possibly different soil, different care, maybe different owners, who knows? But that tree can't wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly start producing lemons. You need to focus on the roots. In the same way, Jesus explains how this works. He says, remain in me. Some of us know the word abide in me, remain in me, as I also remain in you. This is this place of intimacy, not just I went to church, tick the box. I read a scripture on WhatsApp, tick the box. No, I'm living in a life-giving, vital, intimate relationship with Jesus. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. I am the life-giving one. I am the fruitful one. I am the good one. You are the branches. Therefore, if you remain in me and I in you, then you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And so if we want to be those apple jelly beans, if we want to be locations whereby God's goodness is expressed in this world, we do not do that by waking up tomorrow and trying harder. We do that by remaining in the life-giving relationship that Jesus offers to us. There is no other way. So maybe you say, Stephen, I know how sermons work. You normally set us up and then you answer the question. And so if you're telling us that we need to remain in Jesus, now you're going to follow this up with a little 2-minute explanation as to how we can remain in Jesus. But I'm not going to do that. Do you know why? Because we've just spent 4 months speaking about how to remain in Jesus. There's a reason and a logic to learning to remain in Jesus as first priority. We didn't start with fruits. We started with remaining. We started with being, learning to be with Jesus. Most of you will remember the challenge that we've done twice this year, learning to spend a day with Jesus, learning to enjoy Jesus, nurture a life-giving relationship with Jesus. And remember, learning to love His words, learning to be with Jesus through His word, learning the heart of Jesus, learning to receive the love of Jesus, learning to be on that path of repentance whereby I'm walking with Jesus towards life. All of those are about learning to remain in Jesus, which is why I challenged you 2 weeks ago. How many of you, and I don't want you to raise your hand, how many of you have done anything different in your discipleship as a result of anything you've heard from Scripture this year? Not because I'm this power-hungry pastor who needs his congregation to obey him. Rather, because I am convinced of John 15, that if we are to bear fruit, we need to remain in Jesus. And just like if I want the fruit of a healthy body and a healthy mind, I need to make time for the kinds of habits and practices that are going to naturally produce that fruit in my life. In the same way, if I want the spiritual fruit, I need to make time for the kinds of habits and practices that are going to keep me connected to the person of Jesus Christ. And it is out of that place of intimacy that fruit will start to develop in my life. Listen to Luke 6 verses 45. It says, a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. And an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. If we want goodness to be expressed in our lives, we need to be storing up goodness in our lives. And we do that by being connected to the vine and remaining in Jesus. So number one, we need to focus on the roots, not the fruit. Secondly, we need to discern the fruit. Here's what I mean by that. You will root yourself in the soil that will give you the fruit you long for. You will naturally root yourself in the soil that will give you the fruit you long for. Now listen, if the essential nature of fruit is the goodness and love and power of God expressed in me and through me, notice it is all about who I am. It is all about my being a human being. It is about who I am. It is about my very nature. It is about my character. But it is so tempting to lose sight of that and prioritize the development of different kinds of fruit in our lives. And so for some of us, we work hard in developing the fruit of a big salary or a big company or outward success or a promotion. And we look at that fruit and we go, oh wow, look at this fruit. Therefore I am fruitful, therefore I am good. Now there's nothing necessarily wrong with those kinds of things. But even if I look at that in my own world, the world of leading a church, it is so tempting to take my eyes off the fruits of character. The fruit of my own personal transformation as I personally abide and remain in Jesus. And it is so easy to look around me and become enamored with the fruit of bigger churches, the fruit of bigger budgets, bigger staff, pastors who fly around the country or even the world to speak at different conferences and who sell tons and tons and tons of books. Again, those aren't necessarily bad things, but they become idols when I am rooting myself in the kind of soil that, yes, develops those things, but I've got a bankrupt character with God. And here's the problem. The world sees this fruit and considers that success. But the success, in inverted commas, of remaining in Jesus is not expressed on a stage. It is in the quiet place. It is through long seasons of being with Jesus and surrendering myself to my character being transformed by Him. And to be honest, I can fool you with this kind of fruit. And many of you may never know what is truly going on with regards to genuine fruitfulness in my life. So at the end of the day, you will root yourself in the soil that will give you the fruit you long for. And if we are to nourish the roots that will develop true life-giving, goodness of God type of fruit in your life, that is the kind of soil we need to root ourselves in. Thirdly, we need to be patient. We're so used to getting what we want instantly. I haven't bought a paper book for 6, 7, 8 years because with Kindle, I can decide that I want to buy a book and in 30 seconds, I can start reading it. With our TV streaming services, you can watch almost any TV show as long as you want. You don't have to wait a week to watch the next episode. You can almost watch any movie in the world as soon as you go home and connect to your Wi-Fi. Even YouTube, which is just the source of education and entertainment, we've become so bored with YouTube, we don't want to watch a 14-minute YouTube video. We would rather watch the 20-second shorts. And then we import that mentality into discipleship. We may spend a whole 2 days. 2 days in a row waking up and praying and reading the Bible. Hey, some of us might even go to church every week for a whole month. And then we're like, where's the fruit? Where's this goodness of God that I'm meant to be demonstrating in my life? You know, with the technology of time lapses, we can maybe put a camera on a fruit tree and we can observe the fruit making process in maybe a minute or two. But in reality, you can walk up to a fruit tree and you can watch it the whole day. You will see nothing change. The only way you'll see change is in the right seasons. When it bears fruit, it will take weeks. And the bigger, more important change is what happens between seasons. Is this tree producing more fruit this season and better fruit this season compared to a whole year ago? And so while our attention span has diminished, the fruit-making process hasn't. There's a reason Eugene Peterson calls Christianity a long obedience in the same direction. Scott Sauls, he says, fruit never sprouts up instantly into its fully developed, ripened, juicy, sweet, and most edible state. Rather, fruit grows over time through a slow, ordinary, God-orchestrated process. And what is that process? looking after our roots, abiding in Him, and doing the same thing tomorrow and the same thing the next day. A long obedience in the same direction, remaining in Jesus, trusting this God-orchestrated process of fruit development in our lives. And so I want to encourage you towards patience and endurance in this endeavor. And then finally, we need to learn to share the fruit. Fruit is meant to not remain on the tree. Fruit is meant to be tasted. Fruit is meant to be shared, which brings us right back to where we started. Because the world is going to test us and taste us. And I've already highlighted how for many, many people, the experience of Christians is not the sweet goodness and aroma of God, but rather, this one's full of worms. This one's bitter. This one's judgmental. This one's hypocritical. I'm done with Christians. But I've got this stubborn hope that as many times that you eat a green jelly bean that tastes like Brussels sprouts, one day, maybe you'll taste one that tastes like apple. And maybe someone will taste a Christian and go, that's not my normal experience. There's something more about this one. There is something good. Not because they're these good little boys and girls, but there's something divinely good that I can't quite put my finger on, but I want to find out more. Jesus uses different metaphors to describe this reality elsewhere. He says we ought to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Verse 8 again, ending the passage that we read earlier. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. That our fruit bearing, the goodness of God expressed in my life and through my life, somehow becomes the evidence that we are the disciples of Jesus. And this is to our Father's glory, that God is seen as good because of the goodness of God expressed in my life. Somehow our interactions with others is supposed to be good. We are supposed to impart something of God's goodness to others. And naturally, this becomes self-audit time. And the most natural human default is, oh, wow, I'm feeling pretty guilty because I cursed somebody yesterday and, I treated somebody bad the other day and so on and so forth. And, okay, tomorrow I'm not going to do that. Tomorrow I'm going to be good. But once again, while that feels natural, now we focus on the fruits. Today's invitation is to focus on the roots and to trust this God-orchestrated process of developing His goodness in our lives. And so if we want to catch this vision and become these kinds of disciples, whereby God's goodness is something that is imparted through our lives, we're going to focus on the roots by remaining in Jesus. We're going to discern the fruit, meaning we're going to prioritize the kind of fruit that matters. We're going to be patient, meaning we're going to walk a journey of transformation, a journey of formation, a journey of taking deeper roots into Christ. We're going to take this journey of a long obedience in the same direction, and then we're going to learn how to share the fruit, whereby our lives are lived in such a way that people connect our lives to being disciples of Jesus and the glory of God. And so as we consider this, we want to have a moment of response. A moment of invitation, a moment of together bringing ourselves before God. Because this doesn't happen by listening to a sermon and going, good point, Steve. Because we can do that without truly being moved into this abiding relationship with Jesus. And so even together, we can learn how to abide in the life of Jesus. And as we learn to do that together, that can translate into the rest of our lives.
And so as we hear about these things, as we hear about the life and the character of Jesus that is being formed or should be being formed in our lives, let's spend a bit of time coming to that point before Him. And the symbol of the cross, again, is something that we can help to focus on, to focus our attention on, to focus the way that we see ourselves and allow Him to impart what and who He is into us, into our character, and into the discerning of the fruit that we will produce. The character that we take is what we take with us in eternity. The fruit that we bring is the making of disciples, the Great Commission. And these are the things that we need to head into. But let us turn our hearts to the Lord, focusing on Him in this moment, taking the first step, seeing where we fall short in our character, because we know what that is. Each one of us, we know where we fall short. Let's just take a moment of quietly being before the Lord, allowing Him to pinpoint those things where we are falling short within our own character, taking that first step, and then bringing that before the cross, before Him.